The Dale Show. Hey everybody, as you can tell from the different background, the just me, the no three Dale faces, it's a different kind of the Dale Show episode today. Geoff unfortunately was too busy getting a tattoo, and I was gonna wait a week, but that happened like last week. I was gonna record, and then he was like, we had a miscommunication because he could have recorded last week, and I thought he meant he could record this weekend. And since I'd left it like 3 weeks or 4 weeks since Tartaria episode 1, I wanted to hop in and do episode 2, even though he's not here. But don't worry. Don't worry, I'm saving all the crazy shit for episode Tartaria 3. Tartaria episode 3. So this one, I was doing some research on a well, I guess sorry. I'm all over the place. So anyways, Geoff is getting tattooed because he wants to be even more of a badass. It's funny because it's like you watch the show and you see how nice Geoff is and how we're basically just like mid 40s white dudes and we look kind of the same, but Geoff's like light years more badass than me. Like he was a rally car driver and he used to play hockey, which I'm not saying all hockey players are badasses, but hockey players are the toughest, not the strongest, but the toughest athletes because they take so much pain. Like that little rubber puck, you hit me once, I'm quitting hockey forever. But Geoff played for years, and then he was a rally car driver, and he drives a motorbike, and then he just hangs out with me. And like, well, I guess, yeah, like I was a he was a graphic designer too. Sorry if I'm mumbling and kind of all over the place, but the problem with doing episodes by yourself is you're trying to talk about stuff and then your mind is racing on what you want to talk about next, so you don't get too many and ahs and sound like Justin Trudeau. So you kind of like you're kind of talking about something and then you're like, oh shit, I should talk about that next. And then you kind of jump to your next thought before you finish talking about what you're talking about, and then that also why you talk super fast. So this episode will be me trying not to talk too fast and trying not to skip around too much like I just did. So I figured one good way to do that is, did I talk about how big of a badass Geoff is enough? Because I feel like I just kind of like ran through everything. Okay, before I get into it, we'll do some more housekeeping. So I kind of was just all over the place there. Sorry. I'm going to slow it down. So what happened was we recorded Tartaria 1. And I was like, well, that's a good kind of intro. And then I was telling Geoff, I don't know if I mentioned it last episode, but I found an audiobook on mud floods. So I started listening to that, but it turns out it's just like all this note or not note, but it's like point by point. It's not like a narrative tale about the mud flood. It's just this like guy talking through it, and there's so much. It's so thick and heavy that I like have to like take notes as I'm listening, and I can't do that while I'm at work because usually what I'll do with audiobooks is I'll listen to it while I'm at work working. But then if there's too many notes I have to take, I have to stop and get on my phone. And then if I get on my phone too much at work, I'll get in shit. And then I put it aside and I'm like, I'll listen to this when I get home. But as you may know, I have a young child and my girlfriend is also working at the time now. So I don't get enough time to just sit there and listen to stuff and take notes. I mean, I'm not asking for sympathy or anything. I'm basically just trying to explain my excuses. So it's funny because, like, I guess it was 24 years ago, Geoff was my editor at the college paper, and he said something to me. I think I've told him this, but he said something to me, and it was like one of those profound facts that you just like think about for the rest of your life. I was like supposed to give him a story or something, and I was a fuckhead guy who blew shit off back then too, and I was like trying to explain why I didn't finish my story, and Geoff said, I don't want excuses. I want solutions. And Geoff's a pretty profound guy from time to time, and it still affects me. Like every time I'm coming up with an excuses, I'm like, people don't want to know why you're not doing stuff. And this is super good for a work. You don't want to be like, hey, this is why I didn't do this. You want to be like, hey, this is how I'm going to do this after the setbacks that happened. Yeah, I totally lost my train of thought. Sorry. So, anyways, oh yeah, I was talking about doing the research. So I got this audiobook on the mud flood, and it's just too thick and dense for me to take notes. So I was like, hey, I'll listen to this other podcast. And then this guy, it's the Tinfoil Hat podcast. I'll tell you which one it is. It's Tinfoil Hat number 783, Buried Empires, Petrified Past, and Anomalies. So this isn't specifically on Tartaria, but he was Sam Tripoli, the host of Tinfoil Hat, was talking to Ben the Archivist, and he's the host of a YouTube channel called Anomalous America, where he was talking about how he has this series where he goes through every state in the states. Every state in the country. That'd be a better way to say that. And what he'll do is he'll go to like the university archives of that state, like I don't know, some big school in the States, and he'll sign up for their thing. And then he'll go back and look at newspaper clippings from the 17 and 1800s. And as you might guess, there'd be a lot of fodder for Tartarian in there. So as he's going through the episode and talking about all the weird shit he finds, he was hitting on a few important things that are relevant to Tartaria. And since I don't have Geoff with me, and I kind of just have to struggle my way through this. Thanks for coming on my little struggle journey. Um, I figured I would talk about that. And then while I was listening to it, I kind of had, I don't know if you want to call it a breakthrough or an epiphany about the actual mud flood, but I thought of something that it's probably thought of by other people, because if you don't know this, if you go to look up Tartaria, you figure that a hidden society that they're trying to keep secret would not have a fucking tsunami avalanche of content like Tartaria does. It's not even a rabbit hole, it's a sinkhole. Like, if I wanted to, I'm not going to because it's just too weird and nobody wants to hear about it. I could dedicate the rest of the Dale show forever on Tartaria. I'm not going to do that. Um, A, because it's such a hard thing to research. B, there's a million other things to do that are doing that right now. Shout out to what's it called? Oh yeah, my lunch break podcast. That's where that was one of the things that got me into Tartaria, was I kept getting his videos on YouTube, and they're so good. But he'll talk about like specific buildings in the States, and I'm not going to do that because, one, I don't live in the States. Two, it takes a lot of research. Three, I have to edit in a lot of pictures. Like I'll try to edit some pictures in for this one, like I did last one, but these TikTok videos are perfect because they'll be like, he'll go and he'll talk about one specific building, and then he'll have all these pictures, and then he'll look up the records on when it was built. Like he'll talk about some castle or something. It's great. And yeah, so I was listening to this podcast about this guy, and because the two questions that come up with Tartaria is like, because okay, this is, in a nutshell, this is the problem with Tartaria. Because when you go onto social media, like either it be YouTube or TikTok or whatever other social media exists that I don't remember, Threads, maybe, I don't know, you'll find people who are talking about Tartaria, but they'll like this guy, my lunch break. What they'll do is they'll give you all of these examples of Tartaria. They'll be like the World's Fair, which is amazing, and then they'll give you this other thing. Like it would be like on my last episode, when I talked about examples of Tartaria and how it got crushed by the mud flood, but nobody really has an answer for who is working to hide Tartaria. Like, you think about it, we know about all these past like empires, like there's like the British Empire, the Mesoamerican Empire, I think, and then like Spain and Christopher Columbus had their thing, and then there's all this other stuff. And I should have thought of more examples before I came up on the slide, like the Moors when they did the fucking crusades through like Egypt and then wrapped up around Spain. I mean, even the Templar Knights. So you have all these examples of these other empires. Why would they specifically hide Tartaria? And this guy Ben mentioned it, but the example is the original bad, the guilt-free bad, the Catholic Church. They're the ones hiding it. If you remember the Gnostic episode, like the Gnostic episode I did with Geoff, we were talking about how, was it Paul? The secret book of Paul? For some reason, my memory is doesn't just go blank, it just like changes stuff. I keep thinking, was it Paul who wrote the secret book of Paul, or was it the secret book of Peter? But it was Paul. Remember how he was like we were talking about the secret book of Paul, and they found it in this like jar in Necomandi, and the only reason it exists is because the Catholic Church didn't expunge it from the historical record. And I'm only bringing that up because there's that guy. Fuck, I should have looked up his name. Anyways, there was that guy sent out by the church who was going around and trying to erase all these false Christian religions. Because remember, after Jesus died, it wasn't just like one, like, just like, oh, Jesus died, let's make Christianity and then the Catholic Church. It was like, all these people coming up with explanations for God and Jesus. And then the Catholic Church was like, no, we got to destroy all these so we can be the big people and we can take everything and stick it in the basement of the Vatican so that, like, apparently the Vatican has something like beyond ridiculous, like every book ever written. That doesn't seem possible to me. But remember that scene in Indiana Jones and the Lost Crusade, not the Lost Crusade, uh, the one with the Ark. Fuck. Anyways, the Indiana Jones at the end where they show the Ark of the Covenant going in that box. I'm pretty sure it was not the Last Crusade. Fuck, I've got to look it up because this is driving me nuts. It's the first Indiana Jones. It's not the Ark of the Covenant, but that's what they were looking for. So if you will please just bear with me. Indiana Jones and the Dial It Down. Oh, I haven't watched that yet. Maybe I should. Okay, let's go. Indiana Jones, chronological order. My computer's super slow. Oh, the Lost Ark. Oh, okay, anyways. So at the end of Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark, it shows them with the Ark of the Covenant in a box, and it goes in this warehouse, and then it slowly zooms out, and this warehouse is impossibly huge, and it has all this stuff in it. Sorry for scratching my nose. I don't want to edit that out. But that's the Vatican archives, basically, in a nutshell. It's the best way to explain it. Was the ending for the end of Indiana Jones was supposed to be the smart little thing I brought up, but then I forgot what it was, so I had to look it up. So it just drug it out way longer than it had to be. So, anyways, you have the Catholic Church trying to cover up all their own Christian religions and stuff. Like that's why Gnosticism was gone and we never really heard about it until they found the Nag Hammadi script in like 1948, and it's kind of slowly making a comeback. Definitely check out our Gnosticism series. It's a banger. It pretty much made me a Gnostic because it kind of just like all the problems I had with Christianity and when I was a child, because I grew up in the Christian Reformed Church, it kind of just did this. It explained it in a way that made your fingers closer together. Instead of being like this, where you are with Christianity, when you're like, there's the Old Testament, there's a New Testament, they don't make sense. Why is God so nice here and why is he a dick here? This is Gnosticism. It just makes your fingers go together closer, where it's like, oh, hey, Old Testament God, hey, New Testament God, we're actually not the same person. Anyways, I don't want to get sidetracked because that was a whole series of like 3 episodes, so I don't want to do that too much. So, anyways, what I think, Ben brought it up. He said that the Catholic Church changed the Tartaria rule, the lore, I guess you would say, the history, and basically changed it over and said it was the Roman Empire because, oh, sorry, scratching my nose, because you think of the Catholic Church as just the church, but it's not. All of the history of the Holy Roman Empire is the beginning of the Catholic Church. Because when the Catholic Church was falling, or not when the Roman Empire was falling, Ben was saying that it just turned into a religion so it could be more ephemeral and move around a bit easier. So it wouldn't be like this physical state. Because if you turn your empire into a religion, you can't just take a trebuchet and blow up the buildings. I mean, you could blow up Vatican City, but I digress. But so what he's saying was they took the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, technically, if you really think about it, never fell because the Roman Catholic Church still exists and Vatican City in Italy is still there. So they have all the stuff like we still have popes for fuck's sakes. What does that mean? Anyways, so what he was saying was that because if you have like the Roman Empire or whatever, or if you have the church and they want to take over, you can't have the church be like, hey, we kind of just barely beat like the Khans, like Genghis Khan and the Mongols and them. Like we barely beat them and then we took over. You can't have like being like, oh, actually, the Mongolians and the Khans weren't actually barbarians. They were this like technologically advanced empire and we barely beat them and we didn't even beat them by ourselves. It was just this thing called the mud flood that beat them and we kind of just came in and took over all the abandoned buildings and said we were all that powerful and we took all that stuff. Because if you're just the Catholic Church and you're like, yo, we're living in someone else's house, people will be like, well, I don't really like that. Why would I listen to you? So that's why they're trying to hide Tartaria. There's your answer. Because if you found out that all of these great things, a lot of bad things too, that you attribute to the Catholic Church was actually a Russian slash Chinese global empire that had the technology of Atlantis, would you still listen to the church? Because I mean, I gave up on the church a long time ago, but there's a lot of people that were there. Like, if they like basically were just dealing with stolen ideas and all this stuff, they give up. Oh, sorry, I'm recording this by myself. So every time I do this, I like to cut up in chunks. And so, like, because I record through my webcam, so I'll stop every like 10 to 15 minutes. And instead of just stopping and then editing it, I always tell you I'm stopping so it doesn't seem awkward when I come back and I'm like mid sentence. Or like my daughter will come in, or I'll just want to talk about this poster I got. My friend Sean got me this poster from Spain. It is a Moonraker James Bond Spanish release poster. I put it there to fill up because when I started recording, there's just this big white square here, and I was like, well, that's unbalanced and lame and will annoyingly distract me. So thank you to Sean. Yeah, so I'm gonna take so what I'm going to do is for this first cut, I'm just going to keep it why they hid Tartaria. I'll try to get more into it with Geoff because I really want to get his opinion on that. So basically, we're just going to end the first chunk with Tartaria is being hidden by the Roman Empire. Probably other people too, but let's just go with the Roman. Oh, another thing I thought someone said, they just like on a podcast, they said out of nowhere, and it's like it's like a world changer. They said, what if the Library of Alexandria, when it was burnt, what if the Vatican Roman Catholics went in there and took all the knowledge out and then stuck it away in the Vatican City because they didn't want to share? What if all that knowledge isn't gone and they've just been bogarting it this whole time? That'd piss me off. Okay, the second thing I was going to talk about that I promised an answer for was what was the mud flood? Because in episode 1, or not 1, but episode 41, Tartaria, part 1, Me and Geoff were talking about the mud flood and how in a lot of American cities there's 20 to 30 feet of dirt and stuff covering like the bottoms of buildings, and we didn't know what it was from. And then Ben said something on this tinfoil hat episode that made me come up with my own answer, because with life, here's a little free life advice. Sometimes the best thing you can do is come up with a theory or an explanation that makes sense to you. But here's the most important part. You can't stand rigid on that. When you get new information that challenges your idea, update your idea for yourself. You don't have to really do this for anybody else. This is mostly for you, because if life doesn't make sense, it's not going to be hard on other people who don't know life doesn't make sense to you. It's going to be hard for you, the person who's suffering through life where it has no meaning. So, my advice is, even if it's dumb, even if it's flat earth, I'm not saying do that, but as soon as you get information that disproves it, please update your idea. So, what you do is you come up with a theory on the universe, the meaning of life, whatever to you, to make it make sense. Not because you want everybody to know your idea on the earth. I mean, you could start a podcast and let me know in the comments that you started a podcast explaining your idea on how life works and the whole meaning of everything. But until then, just come up with an idea, and then when you get new information, just update your ideas. And then your so you got to think of your like idea of life and your whole interpretation of life as your own body, because as you grow old, you change in all these different ways. Whether you have an accident, you get a scar, or you get a tattoo to remember something, or you go through some dumb style where you like want to have super cool hair, and then you look back at pictures like 20 years later. I was going to say myself, because I used to have this like pink, blue, and white mohawk, but that was fucking badass, so I'm not ashamed of that. And if I still had thick enough hair or wanted to deal with people talking to me about my mohawk, I would still have it. You just come up with this idea and then you totally just lose your train of thought. Anyways, but what I do for myself personally, there's this thing called Occam's razor, which I'm sure you've heard of, but if you haven't, don't feel bad that you don't know information that everybody else is. The basic element of Occam's razor is whatever is most likely to make sense makes sense or not. It's like whatever the most plausible answer to a problem is the answer. Because Occam's razor just, it's basically like whatever would seem like the most obvious. And basically, there's like 30 years of movies just proving this wrong by having like twists and stuff. So for me, there's a couple things like what I was talking about at the beginning when Geoff told me that I don't want to hear excuses, I want to hear solutions. That went into my interpretation of life, and that basically, I don't know, like I don't want to say cliches or whatever, but you put stuff like that in your toolbox. I'm kind of rambling right now, and that doesn't really explain your whole it doesn't really explain your whole idea of life, but it helps you interpret and drive yourself to find the other life. Like one thing that I heard, I can't remember where I heard, but they're like they said that the human brain was invented by the universe so it could experience yourself. So you hear something like pretty profound like that and you're like, "Oh, what if part of the meaning of life is just so we can experience the universe and kind of just be like an exploratory probe where we're like, we learn, like one of my beliefs in the whole thing of life. Well, I'll just tell you here. You know what? Let's put Tartaria aside for now. Dale's going to tell you his meaning of life. So this is what it kind of like works into Gnosticism a bit. So Gnosticism is there's this big pool of energy in the sky, universe, whatever, outside the universe, whatever's bigger than the universe, it's there. And it's basically this pool of energy, and that's where our souls come from. There's a lot more to it. Go listen to Gnosticism if you want. So I like to think of it like that. Like this goes back into the physics where they say energy can't be destroyed or created, is just changes. Like you have like you have heat, light, and all that stuff. So like when you burn fuel, it changes the stored energy into light, heat, sound, and all that stuff. So in my interpretation, I feel like our souls are that too. Like our souls are a piece of energy from all the energy in the universe. And one of the reasons we exist is to experience stuff every day. So, not every day, but like, you know what I mean? Like, you like experience all this stuff, and then you're basically recording it in your subconscious somewhere, or your soul is like, I don't know, maybe your soul's attached like Wi-Fi to the big thing and you're just sending signals back and forth. Maybe that's why you forget stuff, because you don't need to know it, because it's already been up to the cloud or the thing of energy. So as you could see, this isn't really defined, hardened shape meaning of life. This is just my working theory that gets updated every day. Oh yeah, so I was talking. The reason I got into this, is that enough explanation? Sorry, I'm all over the place, but I want to finish off this meaning of life stuff. So, oh, and then like to finish off my theory of life, that's the really bare bones version. I was telling someone about it, like the whole energy thing, and they're like, "That's Taoism." And then I was like, "Holy shit, I should read books about Taoism." And then, if you know me, you know I don't read books that often, because then I just want to take notes, or I'll get sidetracked and just do a whole bunch of Tartaria stuff. So in the end, I never looked up Taoism. Partially, I think subconsciously I didn't want to look it up, because this super profound meaning of life idea I came up with just on my own. I didn't want to just like find out that it was some like hive mind thing where someone else thought of it first and I was just re reinventing the wheel basically that they had already came up with. So anyways, what happens is your soul, like not your soul, yeah, your soul, this ball of energy, when you die goes back up to that big gathering, like in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Odo, when he goes to the collective. That's your soul, and then you just kind of shit out all this information you got, feelings, every your experiences in life, and then you come back in a different body. Like that's reincarnation. Like this part, I'm fairly new. Like I don't know if I believe in reincarnation, but then you hear about like old souls and new souls, where it's like, you know how sometimes it just feels like people know more than you think they should. Like I want to say I'm an old soul, but every time I say that, it feels gross and like cringe. Like I don't want to be like, I'm an old soul because I came to this earth and I knew so much that I shouldn't have known from that little old town of Enderby where I grew up that's only 8,000 people. How was I born so wise? Like I don't want to say I'm an old soul, but I kind of feel like I am. And I think one of the reasons I might be, or other people might, it's easier to talk about other people. It just feels less gross. Maybe that's part of my old soulness and my wisdom is I don't want to be braggadocious. Anyways, so the term old souls could be like a soul that's been reincarnated a bunch, like gone back up to the collective, came back down in a different body, gone back up, or maybe it doesn't even make it all the way up. Like maybe when I'm growing up and my experiences, like they say a lot of reincarnate, like I was just listening to this other podcast about this. Just I wasn't even going to bring this up. That's why this is all just out there. So what could have happened was, like I was listening to Mysterious Universe and they were talking about reincarnation in Japan because they read a book or whatever. Check out Mysterious Universe. That is a trip. Anyways, so they were talking about reincarnation, and it seems like babies, when they're born, sometimes they still have the memories of the past life, but it seems like the theory, not the working theory, but from what they were talking about, it seems like if you die suddenly, I mean, this even rolls into quantum immortality. You remember how on quantum immortality we're talking about how you could shift into a different timeline instead of dying, and like that's where the I'm getting into so much stuff that isn't Tartaria on this podcast, but you know what? It's just me. I gotta fill this time. I don't have to fill this time. I just want to. I want to talk to you. I want to share my thoughts. I want to feel like I made something. So, anyways, in I gotta get back to where I was, so I'm gonna start backwards. So, in quantum immortality, the theory is that when you're gonna die abruptly, you can jump into a different timeline and then you still go. So, like, if I was in a car accident tomorrow, it would be like my soul goes into a different version of me in a different timeline. But then to me, it feels like I didn't die, it just feels like a close call. So maybe with reincarnation, it's like that, but your soul doesn't jump into a different timeline. Your soul goes, hey, I didn't live a whole life. I'm not going to go back to the collective. I'm just going to hang out here a bit, and then I'm going to go into another body so I can get basically like your soul's a jump drive and you have an amount of space, and if you don't live a full life, you haven't filled up that disk space. Sorry to use outdated computer terms. So you have gigabytes, or I guess like Google Plexes or whatever. Google Bytes, is that the thing? Anyway, so you have all this space of information that you can store in your soul, but it's not full. So you say, hey, I'm not going to the collective. I'm just gonna go into a like little fresh baby born body and go in there. And so maybe that's what reincarnation is. And I fucking can't remember how I got. This is why it's so much better to do a podcast with someone else, because then you're like, when you're way out in the fucking weeds, like past the weeds, like you're not even in the golf course anymore. You're not even in the same town. You're just in the middle of an ocean, and you're like, how did I get here? What was I talking about? So I was talking about Tartaria, mud flood, what it actually meant. Sorry, I just want to make sure I don't leave anything on. Oh, this all started because I was talking about coming up with theories and then updating them as you go. Oh, God. So nuts. So I started off this chunk of the podcast wanting to talk to you about what the mud flood actually was. And then I went into the meaning of life. Hey, sometimes life's a journey. Why can't a podcast be a journey? Hey, you with me? I hope I shared some stuff that like maybe helped you figure stuff out. Maybe didn't explain stuff for you, but maybe made you want to figure it out for yourself, because you got to figure it out for yourself, but you got to take the knowledge from other people. And before we move on to what the mud flood actually was, I just want to say um you have to be a you don't have to. That sounds like you have to. I just want to say allow yourself to get new information from a source you wouldn't really expect it to. Because if you only want to, or if you only allow yourself to take in new information and learn lessons from well established places, you're not going to learn as much as you would as. That's why I love these crazy podcasts, because like Tinfoil Hat, Jimmy Dore. Well, Jimmy Dore's not really conspiracy, so he doesn't count. Like Modern Universe, all these podcasts that just talk about crazy conspiracy theories and stuff. You'll listen to them and you'll be like, "That's nuts! That's so crazy." But then you'll hear like Ben say something a little weird, and you'll be like, "Oh!" And then you'll get an idea that'll just pop into your head, and you'll be like, "Oh, that's what the mud floods were." Ah, that makes so much sense. You know what? Before I move on to explaining what the mud floods were, I'm just going to break it there and then come back, because that's like 15 minutes. I'm so paranoid about losing episodes, because the way you do this is I'm using Wondershare More. It's this program. I don't even know if it's good. It's just the one I've been using for years. And it's like you record in like you start your episode file, and then you're like in the editing software, you record and that puts this video in it. And I did it once and I lost the video, so I had to start over. So I'm never ever doing that again. And I always do it in chunks just in case I lose something. Then like I only have to go back and re-record 15 minutes at a time. That's my excuse and solution. The other good thing that happens because I keep breaking this up is when I crack a new near beer and it just shits foam all over my crotch, nobody saw it happen because I wasn't recording at the time. So that's another good thing. So the funny thing about this episode was I was like, I'll just go through these notes on this podcast I was listening to. Geoff's not here. I'm recording by myself. I keep saying that, keep bringing it up. But I've gone through exactly one note so far, and we're pretty deep in this. So, I mean, this is what happens when you only record every couple weeks is you just get verbal diarrhea and you're like, hey, all this stuff I was thinking about when I was at work, I gotta tell my fans. They'll want to hear me talk about my interpretation of life and what the universe wants from us. Of course they will. Otherwise, I wouldn't be listening to this podcast. Because that's what you get. Ugh. Crotch is so wet with beer. Yuck. Okay, I'm gonna try ignore that and keep recording, but hey, we'll see where we get. Okay, so I promised like 20 minutes ago I was going to explain what the mud flood was. It's the 20 to 30 feet of dirt that covers the bottom of these buildings in the States. And as Ben says, crazy enough, he says that the mud flood that we're talking about, the 20 to 30 feet that are covering like the bottoms of these Capitol buildings in the States, that's not even the first time it's happened. He says in his episode or in his podcast that there's up to 4 levels of cities. Like a city will be built and it'll just get mud flooded and covered, and then they'll build another one on top because they're like, hey, look at this fresh ground, and then they'll just keep building. And he was saying in Mexico they're going to dig a well, and when they were going down they found 3 different cities, and then at the bottom one it had like Chinese hieroglyphics. And this could happen because this happens in Egypt. Like archaeologists will be digging up something in Egypt and they'll go down it far enough and they'll be like, it'll be like they built the city on the ruins of another city. And that is well documented. It was well documented. That makes it sound like it's definitely not well documented. And it sounds, whenever you say there's evidence, no, it's not when you say there's evidence of this. Whenever you say there's lots of evidence, it makes it sound like you made it up. But anyway, so this happens in Egypt. Like these cities are built on other cities, and like basic what we would call the old world, like Egypt and the Levant region and all that stuff. So why couldn't that have happened here? Like they've had like if you're into Graham Hancock territory, people have been able to like build societies for like 15,000 years. And North America and South America, or like North America is so prime for the taking. Like think about like how juiced up like Columbus and whoever the French were that came to Canada when they get here, and it's basically this empty land with all these resources. Like if you think about it, Occam's razor, to bring that up again, you would think that somebody would have gone there before. Like England was sailing down like they were going past Spain, down all the way down past the Horn of Africa and back up to India to get spices. They were building like their empire over there. Who's to say they didn't just turn right? And they're like, yeah, the water would have been cold as you're going up past Greenland and stuff, but who wouldn't try that? Like, there's this whole world, and you like to get the spice and to get rich. I mean, I'm not. I mean, maybe that's why, because they're already going to get rich if they like. You're going out from England and you're going past the European continent, like France and stuff, and then you turn left and you just go forever, and then you turn left again. Like, who's not going to turn right and be like, hey, what's up here? Maybe we'll find some stuff. Like the Vikings came to North America in like New Brunswick. It's one of those part of our heritage commercials where they found like artifacts, and then but they're saying they got chased away by the First Nations people. What if it wasn't the First Nations people? What if there was an empire here before? Anyways, that's all conjecture. That's the crazy stuff I'll get into with Geoff. But the reason I'm bringing this up is, why wouldn't there be cities here before? Like, we've got 15,000 years of history. We've got all this stuff that, like, in other parts of the world that goes back, like, not Chichen Itza. Oh, fuck, I can't remember that. Gobekli Tepe. That's like 12,000 years old. And it's like monoliths. So that doesn't mean that it, like, 10,000 years ago, the birth of a civilization just built these great monoliths. They were at the point where they could build great monoliths 12,000 years ago. That means must have had like way many lots of years, sounds scientific, to build up to that point where they could build those. So, and the thing about this is, if the mud flood happened before and you didn't have like Tartarian grade, like, um, the Notre Dame church and all that stuff. Like, you didn't have these super nice tall buildings. Like, you just had some little like 2-story buildings. Maybe they got covered up. Maybe 20 to 30 feet of dirt just happened to hit before, and then you couldn't see it. Okay, enough fucking around, guys. Here's what the mud flood is. It's volcanic ash. That's my guess. You know what? It's fact. I'm just gonna say it's fact. Okay, and because Ben on this the Tinfoil Hat podcast, he was talking about how they would go down, like I gave you the example of them talking about going to Mexico and then going through 3 cities. He's saying in other parts of the world, in the States somewhere, like, because all of his stuff's in the States, and he's like, from what I'm just gonna say he's talking facts because I don't want to be like the fact check guy. I'm just gonna be like, this is what he said, because then it helps my theory too. So, like, in his going through the articles in the 1700s and 1800s, he was saying they were building something and they went down and they, like, oh, he was saying some miners were going down a coal vein and they're digging up the coal and they're going down, and then they hit like these trees that were standing. They were buried, of course, but they were old. Like, it was an old petrified forest, and they were covered up in like the dirt or whatever, just like the mud flood covered these buildings. But the trees were still standing. And if you think about the mud flood as a flood or a tsunami, it would come in with so much force it would just knock over all these trees or buildings in the States. That's another reason why it's so hard to believe that these are actually old buildings just covered up with mud. But if you think about it like volcanic ash falls like snow. And I got to toot my own horn here. I did a little research because I thought, when a volcano explodes, I thought it was just like lava shit that came out. I didn't understand what it is. So here's some notes I took from Wikipedia about volcanic eruptions. So, volcanic ash is usually about the consistency of flour and falls similar to snow. Here's where I go back up my theory, because explosive eruptions occur when magma decompresses as it rises, allowing dissolved volatiles, dominantly water and carbon dioxide, to exsolve into gas bubbles. So basically, what's it saying is like, okay, I guess super layman's terms, a volcano is like a peak, but in the middle there's this tube that goes deep into the ground, and down at the bottom of this tube is lava, and the lava comes spurting up the spout. And me, never really thinking about volcanoes that much, even though I did one science project about volcanoes, I think. Did I? No. You know the one where you just like make baking soda and vinegar and it goes like, I didn't think baking soda and vinegar was in the earth. I thought it was just all lava that came out of a volcano. I didn't understand that as the thick, like, super compressed, hard, molten rock and whatever the fuck else is in magma comes up the tube, it kind of, as I said before, it kind of just expands, and then it chews up and turns into gas, and that's the plume that comes out of the top of the volcano. That is like, here, I'll just keep reading this. As more bubbles nucleate, a foam is produced, which decreases the density of the magma, accelerating it up the conduit. See, I thought it was just the force pushing it from below. I didn't think it was like it bubble. I didn't think it was like pop when foam comes out. Like that beer I just spilled all over my crotch. Oh my god, it's kismet. Um, of the fragmentation occurs when bubbles occupy 70 to 80% volume of the erupting mixture. When fragmentation occurs, violently expanding bubbles tear the magma apart into fragments which are ejected into the atmosphere where they solidify into ash particles. Fragmentation is a very efficient process of ash formation and is capable of generating very fine ash even without the addition of water. So, what this is saying, I'd never thought about this before, like I keep saying, but as the foam basically shits out the top of a volcano, the magma, which is just liquefied hot rock, that all gets dissolved into particles. Well, it doesn't get dissolved, but it gets all broken down into particles and it shoots out in the foam. So it's like mixture of like, and then it goes up into the atmosphere and it's like these tiny things and then they glom together in the air like way up in the atmosphere and then they fall down. So this is why when a volcano explodes the fucking ash goes so far, because it's not because that, like I used to think, that they just got shot that far out of the volcano and it's like basically ballistics. Like if you were to shoot a bullet and it goes up and out, it would be like if you shot a bullet so hard that it exploded into like dust, and then as the dust went up from the force it hit the atmosphere, and then when it was in the atmosphere the dust from the bullets started hitting each other and then falling down as chunks of bullets. So this is what I think happened. Somehow, okay, I'm going to somehow, sorry to stumble on my words like that. Somehow there was a big enough volcano or Younger Dryas impact, back to Graham Hancock and how the ice age ended, where it basically a comet hit like the ice sheet. So if you're new to volcanoes like I am, I thought I knew about volcanoes. I was like when I was a kid, I was like, that's volcanoes sorted. Don't need to learn about that. I didn't know what a caldera was. I was like, that's just volcano speak. So what a caldera is it's all this shit that turned into form and got shot into the atmosphere comes out of the ground. And then the caldera is like the big basin that happens when like basically the volcano sinkholes on itself and then there's just this big dish because all the shit got, it's like when you pop a zit and then there's a hole there. That's what it is. So what if one of these like things where they think a comet hit, what if that was just a gigantic caldera and all like it wasn't like an asteroid hit and made a hole? What if that was just like a volcano erupted and shat everything out? I'm just going to say shat as much as I can into the atmosphere. So what if like here, you know what? I'm going to Google this. What is the largest comet impact crater? Let's see. The Chicxulub crater, prehistoric impact crater buried underneath the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. So, what if this Chicxulub crater? I mean, they could probably prove this with science and like doctors and guys with white coats and stuff. But if they're trying to hide it, mm, mm, what if they say this was a comic impact, but it's a caldera? What if, I mean, I should have looked up one that was easier to say. Like, I'm like, hey, look at my great idea. The Google's the fucking crater and be like, this Chicxulub crater. What if it's a caldera? What if a comet never hit there? What if that's just all that shit just got shot out of a volcano? How much shit would you need to bury buildings with 20 to 30 feet of ash? Well, I will give you an estimation because if Yellowstone, which is considered a super volcano, if that erupted, there'd be like lava flows and all that stuff. And, um, but sorry, I just was trying to read and talk at the same time, which I shouldn't do. I mean, I should read what I'm saying. Basically, my notes say that if Yellowstone erupts, it'll kill 90,000 people with the lava flow. But it will also leave 10 feet of molten ash will fall like snow in a 1,000-mile circle, 1,609 kilometers from the park. That's basically a fair chunk of Canada and the States. So I don't know how you would figure this out, what sort of like volcano math you would have to come up with to figure out what's 20 feet of ash. Because if Yellowstone, we know the size of that volcano, and it does 10 feet, what would we need to do 20 feet? Basically, how big would that volcano have to be to do the mud flood? Was the Chicxulub crater big enough? I hope I'm saying that right because I'm so proud of myself for figuring it out. But you know what? Whatever. So, I had all these other notes about all these things Ben was talking about how, like, okay, here, I'll give you this one. Most quarries that are in operation today are actually sites where they're dismantling Tartarian structures. So, like, there's this rock wall in Texas. It's like you could just Google it. I just did. It's like there's this thing called Rockwall, Texas. There's this town, and there's this naturally formed rock wall that goes through it. And they've started, and in spots, people would see this and be like, "Hey, those rocks look like they're already cut and stuff. Let's just take them and build like this rock wall." Apparently, is also part of the Mississippi Great Wall. Like it's this I never heard of this, but there's this wall that goes through the states, and I'm just gonna look up my notes specifically. It's called the Brady-Wine Wall. So and there's some plot spots in Mississippi where they took rocks from this wall to build buildings. So, anyways, what Ben was saying was the quarries are on top, like where the quarries were, they would just blow up a building or whatever, and then all the stuff would fall, and then because it's a lot easier to take these old Tartarian super hard stones and make stuff out of them instead of just like digging it up from the ground and cutting it into little squares. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to go through any more Ben notes because I've been over an hour. I probably should go pay attention to my child before she goes to bed. And I kind of want to save all these crazy notes for Geoff because it's, as you could see from what I was talking about, sometimes it's a little hard to keep your stuff straight and you end up wandering into the weeds, which, hey, I enjoyed the journey. I feel like you know what? The funny thing about this is you guys are probably my therapy. Like I don't want to go to therapy because I feel like therapy is best served to people who don't know where their problems come and how they self-sabotage. And that's basically all I think about is like, am I self-sabotaging right now? Why am I feeling like this way? Does this have something to do with my childhood? Like, I think about all that stuff. So, I don't want to go to therapy to prove myself wrong because I'm Generation X and basically all we do is underachieve so that we don't have to be disappointed. Like, you don't have to, like, it's like guys who won't talk to girls. Like, you don't have to deal with rejection from a girl if you never talk to her. Eh? You don't have to feel bad about the shot you missed if you don't take any, like that famous old quote, which is probably something else. Yeah, so anyways, I just lost my train of thought because the computer froze and the bird flew by the window and I don't know, I'm that's about as and it's been like an hour and my brain's like running on fumes. So I'm gonna leave it there. I'm gonna save some of my notes from Ben and all the stuff we talked about. And I'm going to talk to Geoff in a couple weeks. Maybe you'll get 2 episodes in 2 weeks. That would be crazy. We never record that often. Anyways, so this was episode 42 of The Dale Show. Thank you for coming along and, just letting me talk my stuff about Tartaria, even though I didn't really talk about Tartaria much. But hopefully, we now know why Tartaria was kept a secret, and we now know what the mud flood was. It was I'm going to say it one more time because you know what? This word was really hard and annoying to say at first, but now that I feel like the Chicxulub crater, you know what? Maybe I should go to, you know what? I'm going to Google how to pronounce this word because I feel like you've been on this journey this long. You're going to want to know how. Anyways, the reason I came up with that was I Googled the biggest crater impact on the planet, and that's what it came up with. Okay, how to say pronounce. Okay, here's the moment of truth where we find out if I was right. I'm just listening to it right now. Oh my god.
How to pronounce Chicxulub. Chicxulub.
It's actually pronounced Chicxulub. The guy on the YouTube video, that was that annoying pause, was because when you look up how to pronounce something and then you go to YouTube, you have to listen to ads and stuff. But he was saying, the funniest thing is, it's like, how to pronounce Chicxulub. You pronounce it Chicxulub. It's like basically all you have to say is how to pronounce, then the word, and you already know how to pronounce it. Maybe that's just me being nitpicky and stuff. So it's not Chicxulub, it's Chicxulub. So I was close. Sorry, any of my South American listeners. Carlos, if you're out there listening to this, he was a guy I went to college with in 2003, who's from Mexico. And we actually just started not talking to each other, but sending messages back and forth on Facebook. I'm going to tell him to listen to this because I just gave him a shout out. So there you go, Carlos. Chicxulub. I finally learned Spanish.